Ready.
Good morning. My name is Michael Vickerman. I'm Policy Director for Renew Wisconsin, and I am honored to be moderating our first panel of the day, All In on Renewable Energy. This summit and our panel discussions would not be possible without the generous support of our sponsors. And I would especially like to thank Arch Electric for sponsoring this morning's panel, and thank Stanley Minnick for being such an engaging and welcoming presence both yesterday and today. During our discussion, feel free to use the chat box to engage with other summit attendees. You can also post questions for the panelists in the Q&A box. There's a lot of ground to cover today, but we'll try to leave some time at the end for a few of your questions. So let's get started. After the introductions, we will, one at a time, provide a quick overview describing our respective organizations' approach to deep decarbonization and how investing in renewable energy will bring us closer to our goals. We are fortunate to have with us Nick Smith, Ken Walls, and Samantha Williams, three very articulate individuals who approach the challenge of transitioning to a clean energy economy from very different vantage points. So let's meet our panelists. Our first panelist is Nick Smith. Nick started with Alliant Energy in 2007 and has been involved in distributed energy resources since 2008. Based in Cedar Rapids, Nick is currently the team lead distributed generation and operations manager. In his current role, Nick manages the interconnection and operation of distributed generation to the Alliant energy distribution system, as well as qualified facility power purchase agreements. He is also a member of WIDER, which you'll hear more about later, the Wisconsin Distributed Resources Collaborative, where he has served as steering committee member since 2018. Nick graduated from Mount Mercy University with a bachelor's degree, double majoring in business administration and finance. Our second panelist is Dr. Kenneth Walls. Ken has taught science, engineering, and renewable energy at Madison Area Technical College since 2003. Where he serves as the director of the Center for Renewable Energy Advanced Technological Education, which we'll mercifully call CREATE from here on out. And this is funded by the National Science Foundation. Ken earned his PhD from the University of Wisconsin while performing research on advanced lithium-ion batteries with Rayovac and Argonne National Laboratory. Ken has been recognized as Professor of the Year by the Carnegie Foundation and the Council for Advancement and Support of Education, and as the Energy Educator of the Year by the Wisconsin Association for Environmental Education. Our third panelist is Samantha Williams. Samantha is the Midwest Regional Director for Natural Resource Defense Council's Climate and Clean Energy Program. In that capacity, Samantha manages regional strategy for a team of state advocates working at the regulatory, utility, and state legislative levels to further policies that cut pollution emissions and accelerate the Midwest transition towards an affordable and just clean energy economy. Prior to joining Nrdc, she worked as a policy advisor at the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. Samantha holds a bachelor's degree in biological sciences from Mount Holyoke College and a JD from Vermont Law School. She is based in Nrdc's Chicago office. All right, so I'm going to activate the screen share here. So I'm going to ask, there we go. And activate the PowerPoint. Okay. The way I see it, all in is shorthand for a combination of a few well-known phrases, such as all hands on deck, being on the same page, and no holding back. These phrases convey such themes as a common vision, a sense of urgency, and the necessity of teamwork. All in on renewable energy means much more than slotting renewable energy into a preordained niche. Rather, it means rebuilding an infrastructure and changing behavior to accommodate the centrality of clean energy in our future. Now I'm going to seriously sprint through 6 slides that may help you conceptualize and visualize all in on renewable energy. They certainly do for me. These slides recognize individuals, organizations, and companies who are taking Wisconsin further along the way towards a 100% clean energy future through their vision and actions. You can learn more about our 2020 award winners on our event hub space. So here's Northwind Solar Cooperative, for example, a small solar contractor in central Wisconsin that relies on community engagement to better serve the residential and small commercial space. Advance. Nope, we're trying to advance.
Michael, if you go ahead and click on the slides, it should allow you to advance after that.
Oh, I see it. There we go. We're good. Here's Aspirus Health, based in Wausau, cultivating a culture of sustainability across its entire healthcare network to help it achieve aggressive carbon reduction goals by 2030. Here's Charles Hua, a Madison West High School graduate who successfully led a student and faculty-based campaign to put a large solar system on the roof of his school. Here's Oregon School District, demonstrating that it is possible to design and build a large net zero energy, all electric school building in the state of Wisconsin. Here's Dane County, taking the initiative to invest in clean energy along a variety of pathways with an eye to offsetting all of its electricity use with new zero carbon generation by the end of 2022. And finally, here's Two Creeks Solar Park, the largest power plant in Wisconsin powered by the sun, developed by NextEra Energy to supply cost-effective zero carbon electricity to Wisconsin Public Service and Madison Gas and Electric customers. So that's what all in on renewable energy means to me. Now I'm going to turn it over to our panelists, starting with Nick Smith. Take it away, Nick.
All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning. And thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here, especially with such great panelists and talking about all in as far as renewable energy in the state of Wisconsin. I say that coming to you from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, but I do work quite a bit in the Madison and Wisconsin area and our service territory there. And if you want to advance the slide there, Michael. I'm with Alliant Energy, and for those that don't know, Alliant Energy is an investor-owned utility. We serve about 1,300 communities, or we're in, 1,300 communities in Iowa and Wisconsin, and about 970,000 electric customers and 420,000 gas customers, half of which of both of those reside in Wisconsin itself. It's made up of two companies, Wisconsin Power and Light, headquartered in Madison, Wisconsin, and Interstate Power and Light, not Iowa Power and Light. I believe it says our Iowa Power and Light there, but it should be Interstate Power and Light, headquartered in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, are the two companies that make up Alliant Energy. You can advance the slide there. So how is Alliant all in as far as the transformation here? So Alliant, a year ago or so, put in a roadmap, if you will, our clean energy blueprint, as far as how we're going to transition from the fossil-based fleet that we have today to a more renewable energy and sustainable carbon-free generation. So over that time, we plan on decommissioning some of the coal plants, if not all of our coal plants in both Iowa and Wisconsin, and increasing our use of solar and other technologies as we try to make sure that we have a sustainable path to help the economy and communities in the state of Wisconsin as well. If you advance the slide there. So on that blueprint, we have going to be adding 1 gig of solar by the end of 2023. So that's a huge endeavor, which we've already started, and that'll be a mix of utility scale owned and purchase power agreements with solar developers. Beyond that, we have our renewable energy suite of tariffs or rate schedules, our customer hosted, which is basically our ability to put solar on a building or lease land for customers, community solar, which we'll talk a little bit later, and then our utility scale solar packages and renewable packages for our renewable energy partners, which allows us to partner with a large scale project with a large customer or community. To bring that resource to that community or to that customer. You want to advance the slide, please? So our first community solar project is going to be in Fond du Lac. I believe it will be a 1 megawatt expected to go online at the end of 2021. So this will be on the distribution system, and customers can contract or purchase solar blocks to offset 100% of their energy usage, and they'll receive a credit on their bill. You can certainly see more information, or if you're interested in subscribing, at alliantenergy.com/community solar. Next slide, please. And we talked a little bit about the Dane County project. Alliant is very excited for this partnership. So we'll be putting a 16.5 megawatt solar field in the Cottage Grove area, and expected that to be online by the end of 2022. So we're very happy that to partner with Dane County, and they have some ambitious sustainability goals, and we're happy to be a part of that and providing some much needed project for our customers. So that's a quick overview of what we have, and I'm happy to answer questions later, and I'm sure we'll, through the discussion, talk a little bit more about our efforts and on the all-in in Wisconsin. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Now I'm turning the floor over to Ken. Ken.
Thank you, Michael, and it's a pleasure to be here for the Renew Summit today. It's a pleasure to speak with the audience. You're looking here at a picture of Madison College's Truax campus. This is the largest rooftop solar photovoltaic system in the state of Wisconsin. And I was looking at my calendar. It was almost 2 years ago to the day that we hosted the ribbon cutting for this ceremony. And it's been fully operational since June of 2019. That's a 1,850 kilowatt system. It provides about 25% of the electricity for the building. And we were honored this past year to receive a Green Power Leadership Award from the Environmental Protection Agency. Sort of keeping in theme with Michael's all in on renewable energy, what I wanted to emphasize is that project, while it's a really nice showpiece, is just one piece of a larger plan that the college has to implement solar at all of our campuses and all of our buildings. About 4 years ago, the college began work on a solar roadmap. We looked at prioritizing the reasons that our college wanted to go solar. The top two being cost savings and learning opportunities for students. Those are sort of a tie. And hence the large system at our Truax campus was the first project we initiated, because that was both the largest energy user, and that building also served the largest number of students. As you can see on the right there, we then looked at all of our campuses and all of our facilities and prioritized, put together a strategic plan for getting solar on each of those campuses. And we're now a little bit more than halfway through that list. And I put together a few pictures that people like to look at. Go ahead there, Mo. This was our South Campus that we opened in September of 2019. That's a 125 kW system. And the work there was done by H&H and Eland Electric. If we go ahead one more slide. These are two systems that we completed this fall at our Reedsburg and Fort Atkinson campuses. The Reedsburg campus, a 100 kW system, provides 50% of the electricity for that building. And the Fort Atkinson campus, 150 kilowatts, actually has brought that campus to net zero electricity. And both of these installations were done by Arch Electric. And if we go ahead one more. And this is our newest system. This is our early learning center here at our Madison campus, just completed in December last month by Full Spectrum Solar. And that's a 150 kW system that'll be providing power for that facility once we get to post-COVID environment. That's where we have daycare and childcare services for our students. We have more solar installations planned for the next year, and anticipate a few more in 2022 and 2023, and hopefully by if you invite me back to speak at a summit in 2024, we may have solar on all of our buildings and all of our campuses. Maybe just go ahead one more slide there, Michael. As we pursued all of this work, what we really aim to do is not just serve our buildings, but to serve as a model for other schools. Michael mentioned the Create Energy Center is funded by the National Science Foundation. Through that work, we created a Solar on Schools toolkit to share our experience with any other school district that is interested in pursuing a solar photovoltaic system or creating a strategic plan for their school. This is all available on the website, and we share all of our financial models, our requests for proposals, all of our installation and project documents with others so that they can maybe learn from that experience. I will say we've gotten so much interest since we commissioned that large system that before COVID, I was giving a tour every other week for a group from some other school that was considering solar. After COVID hit, I ended up spending some time on the roof and making a virtual tour because we got so many requests about that if we could host visitors. So I do look forward to a time when we live in a post-COVID world with a vaccine, and I invite all of you to come visit me. You can see in the backdrop a picture of our building, and I'd be happy to get you up on the roof so that you can see the system up close.
Thank you so much, Ken. So now let me introduce to you Samantha Williams.
Hi, everyone. Samantha Williams with Nrdc. Really happy to be here. So we work on a range of clean energy policy issues. We are an environmental organization nationally, but also very focused here in the Midwest. Renewables are obviously a huge part of the decarbonization toolkit. We're really all in on clean energy, as the theme of this panel suggests. But I have been asked today to focus more on the electrification perspective, and in particular buildings. So I have just a few short slides to orient things before we get into the Q&A. So next slide, please, Mike. So first off, I wanted to just define some terms. In the advocacy community, and I think also amongst utilities and others, we often use the term beneficial electrification. So to reach our broader climate goals and do it in a way that unlocks benefits for consumers, electrification, which really load building, is not going to be enough. We need to make sure that we are driving a whole host of other benefits to consumers and to the grid. And so we tend to think of beneficial electrification as bringing about three core goals. Number one is that it's good for customers, saves them money on their bills. Number two, good for the climate and the environment, so reduces emissions overall. Number three, it supports our electric grid, which I think we're going to talk more about today. The electrification can enable better grid management. It can integrate renewables, drive down system costs, et cetera. Next slide, please, Mike. Mike, keep clicking on that. The other images should appear. There's sort of a anticipation here in this slide. There we go. So here are the key pillars of economy-wide decarbonization I wanted just to get out for discussion here. Yeah, keep going, one more. And to convey the impact of building electrification policy on climate progress and Wisconsin's goals. So everyone now is familiar with Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, this report from 2018 that set a new benchmark for livable climate of limiting average global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial levels. And to get there, we're going to need to accelerate our decarbonization ambition, build renewables, cut emissions across our system, and get to as close to zero emissions as we can economy-wide by 2050. And that goal has really inspired a tidal wave of decarbonization commitments from utilities, states, cities, et cetera, over the last few years. And so this slide shows the core strategies that really the advocacy community has been emphasizing for a long time now, but have been confirmed in the IPCC report and also in economy-wide modeling that's come out in the last few years. So those three core strategies are energy efficiency, renewable energy, getting as much renewables on the grid as we possibly can. And then third, electrification. And so taking that increasingly clean electric grid and quite literally plugging everything else that we can into it that relies currently on oil and gas. So cars and trucks on the transportation side, buses. On the building side, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about today, is gas-fired appliances in your home, in your office building. So space heating, water heating, cooking, et cetera. And so from the Midwest perspective, buildings looking across the region are the third largest contributor to CO2 emissions, with transportation and power generation being number one. If you look at Wisconsin, the picture gets a little more complicated because ag and industry are actually very pollution heavy. And so they're up there with buildings. But, you know, building sector in Wisconsin is really going to be a key part of the decarbonization picture. So I wanted to make sure that it was part of the discussion today. Next slide, please, Mike. So a few more slides here to drive home the importance of building electrification in our region in Wisconsin. This is a slide from Rocky Mountain Institute showing that 10 states, only 10 states, roll up to over half of the direct on-site greenhouse gas emissions from buildings. And so that's combusting gas, sometimes oil and propane directly in your homes and buildings. And there's 4 of those 10 states are here in the Midwest, and Wisconsin is on that list. And so if we can move to cutting emissions from our buildings, which is both an electrification opportunity, but also solar and bringing together a lot of these distributed energy resources that Ken and Nick already talked about, we're gonna have a really big impact nationally if we can do that here and get it figured out in the Midwest. Next slide, Mike. And so this is just one more thing to drive home the importance of the building sector, and also the road that we have ahead of us to get to a decarbonized sector and to electrify our fossil use. So the majority of homes in the Midwest rely on gas. And so this is a handful of Midwest states on this slide. The gray bar here is showing gas use for home heating. And on the far right is the US average. And so we actually use far more gas in our region than the US average. It's not surprising, we're in a cold climate, but it's also just the way that the gas system has been built out. We tend to rely on it more here. And in Wisconsin, there's actually also a fair amount of propane use, which is identified in that dark blue part of the bar. But the good news is that it's beneficial from a climate perspective today in Wisconsin to electrify the appliances in your home. An RMI analysis came out, Rocky Mountain Institute analysis came out last summer confirming this, that if you switch from your gas appliance in your home to a high efficiency heat pump, for example, you are going to save CO2 emissions over an appliance's lifetime, even without further policy action in your state. But of course, in Wisconsin, we are hoping to clean the grid. And as the grid gets cleaner, those benefits from emissions become even stronger on the electrification side. And so then my final slide, thank you, is just a quick outline of the policy framework for electrification. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in the discussion. But it's going to take a really long time. I just want to be very upfront about this. It's going to take time to electrify buildings, both new construction and existing, and doing all the retrofits. We need a combination of carrots and sticks to scale the technology, develop new policies, et cetera. And we're going to eventually be reaching tens of millions of households across the Midwest. But we need to get started with some key policies to make sure that this transition gets underway. So this slide lays out a few of those. And the first one is to stop digging the hole. And this is about new construction. And accounting for the fact that new homes, once they are built, will be in place for several decades. We need to get to a place where most new homes built are all electric and ideally, ready or electric ready, ideally ready for EVs, ready for solar panels, et cetera. And then the second bucket here is for existing buildings, developing the market for retrofits, getting this technology out into homes, building the demand and driving costs down. It's really similar to what the rooftop solar industry has done over the last decade. And then number 3 is removing regulatory barriers through our commissions to electrify, getting more of this technology into the market and making sure that we don't have those barriers in place. And finally here is planning for an equitable and just transition of the gas system. There's a lot more to talk about, but I think with that, I'll hand things back to Mike.
Thank you so much, Samantha. So we're going to take this off and now proceed to questions. So the first set of questions will actually will be targeted at one of our panelists, and I would invite when that panelist is finished answering the question for the other panelists to respond if whatever they see fit. So let's get started with that. So first question is to Nick. Alliant is moving aggressively, clearly, to decarbonize its generation fleet, and that certainly reflects a high priority within your company. But moving down the generation scale, how high a priority does Alliant attach to promoting the deployment of smaller scale solar and other distributed energy resources, such as demand response, energy efficiency, microgrids, et cetera?
Yeah, so, the big projects, the blueprint gets the most press, right? when you're talking 300 megawatt projects, 100 megawatt, 1 gig of solar, that's huge. But from my perspective, and being that my primary focus is distribution system and distributed generation, we've tried to do things that make sure that we are promoting or not prohibiting customer-owned generation, energy efficiency, demand response programs, beyond what we have in that the clean energy blueprint, right? I mean, the community solar project, that's our first, and we expect to do more in Iowa and in Wisconsin. So that's one thing that we are doing to, get customers that may not have the ability to put solar on their homes, or the infrastructure to put solar on the roof, or maybe they live in a condo or whatever it might be, to be able to participate in those renewable energy projects. Energy efficiency is it's key, right, to any DG, DER project. With the new FERC orders and some things that are coming down the pike here, we have a huge opportunity to take energy efficiency and put it on the same type of a pedestal that we do with distributed generation and with storage and with demand response. And I think Ken could probably elaborate a little bit on this as well, but energy efficiency is the first thing you should be doing if you're even considering putting DG on a roof or anything else, right? So when we get a chance to talk to customers, that's our primary focus, is energy efficiency first. I don't want to take up too much time because there's a lot of things that we're doing, but we are looking at other programs. We're looking at bring your own device type programs for demand response, whether it be a thermostat. We're looking at residential and commercial storage applications, and we're looking at doing our own pilots as far as storage and in front of the meter and behind the meter, to see how those things work and operate. And then, so we can better help and advise as far as customers doing the same type of thing. As I look towards the future with FERC orders 841 and 2222 quad 2x4, or my favorite bunch of twos is what I like to call it. That's a game changer. That's going to be a big thing, and I think that's just only going to move that needle a little bit forward as far as DER in that space, and our promotion of that, and getting customers on board and being an active participant rather than just a passive participant in this clean energy future.
Michael, you're muted.
Sorry.
I can keep going if you want.
Any response from our other panelists?
I'd maybe piggyback on Nick's comments there. I think, Nick kind of hit the nail on the head, and it fits with your theme of all in, is we need solar on all scales. And there's significant benefits to distributed solar beyond just being a clean energy resource. I mean, you have efficiency gains because you don't have the transmission and distribution losses. When you're generating energy where it's used, it means there's you can maybe defer some of those upgrade costs. For us here as a school, we also look at resilience benefits. If you look at a single 100 megawatt solar farm, that could easily get taken out by a tornado. But if instead you have 1,100 kW rooftop systems, the chances of all of those being hit by a tornado is vanishingly small. And for a lot of our schools, they serve as Red Cross centers for operations and distribution of supplies and shelter in the event of a natural disaster or a public emergency. So that's a kind of important consideration for us. Sort of thinking about that same sort of resiliency thing, if you have 1,000 systems out there, the chance of them all being impacted by a rain or a snow event at the same time is lessened. And one of the other things we learned in recent years is, these energy infrastructure has become a target for terrorists and cyber criminals. It's much harder to hack 1,000 systems at once than it is to try and take down a single installation. So those are just some of the benefits that we kind of look at from our perspective at the college here. And I think, the other thing I'd just add, thinking about all in on solar, if we look at the scale of the challenge that we have ahead of us, we need to be pursuing solar on every scale, on the utility scale, commercial and industrial scale, and on the residential scale, if we want to make this transition happen as quickly as it needs to occur.
Yeah, Mike, just quickly, I couldn't agree more with what Ken and Nick just laid out. mean, large scale renewables deployment is obviously a big need if we're going to get to zero on our electric power production. It's the biggest bang for the buck, and assuming that we're backing out of fossil at the same time. But I do think it's sort of a false choice to talk about a trade-off between large scale and smaller scale distributed energy resources. There was a really interesting report released in December from Vote Solar showing the role of rooftop and community solar paired with storage in transitioning to a clean system. And the conclusion was that we do need both. And I also just wanted to raise the inequity issue here, that it's really important that we empower people, everyone, to participate in the energy transition. And community solar and other forms of distributed solar are really the best way to do that. And they provide local visible opportunities for communities of color and low-income communities who have largely been on the receiving end of the power sector's pollution to finally see the benefits of clean power in their communities. And so I really think from a buy-in perspective, it's really important that we think about policies to make sure that we're moving on distributed solar at the same time as we're building big, large-scale projects.
Michael, if I could just jump in real quick here, I get killed by my team if I didn't mention that, you know, we're doing quite a bit as far as renewables and DG and especially on the renewable sector. You know, just some recent numbers that I ran. 2016 through 2019, we did a combined total of 819 residential solar applications. Last year, we did 777 alone, right? So that's a huge number. We got 10.6 megawatts of residential solar installed currently, 40% of which was installed last year. So the numbers are climbing. We have an online application system that allows us to handle that influx. Otherwise, if we were doing this on spreadsheets and other systems, it'd kind of be a nightmare for us. So, I'm kudos to my team and what they're doing. And I know, the work's not done, but very, very proud of those numbers.
Excellent. Thanks for clarifying. Yes, the residential solar market definitely seemed almost jet propelled last year in Wisconsin compared with previous years. So the next question is going to Ken, and this is something you referenced already, the EPA award to Madison College for the large PV system at Truax, and of course your solar roadmap. So my question to you is, how far do these solar investments take you along the path to decarbonization? And secondly, what other measures, both on the generation and the demand side, are under consideration by Madison College to become more carbon neutral?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Michael. Just to kind of put things in perspective, in 2007, our college was one of the first institutions to sign an agreement called the American College and University President's Climate Commitment. And that pledged us to work towards climate neutrality for our school by the year 2040. The first thrust of that plan and earlier was a massive effort on bringing in efficiency. When we started that project over the last 15 years, we reduced our energy use intensity by more than 60%. We dropped from 120,000 BTUs per square foot down to less than 40,000 BTUs per square foot. So that was a lot of, weatherization, insulation, HVAC, relighting of buildings, motion and occupancy sensors, replacing old roof materials with new green and white reflective TPO materials, as well as we tore down and demolished an old inefficient building and built some new highly energy efficient buildings to replace that instructional space. So that was what we pursued before we got into this solar roadmap. The energy efficiency is, I think most of us realize, some low-hanging fruit in many cases if you have older buildings. And now we're working on this PV roadmap. We operate 13 buildings across 8 different campus locations, and we've completed solar at a little bit more than half of those. You asked to what degree we would decarbonize, and this really depends on location. We have 5 different electric service providers in our district with 5 different rate structures and 5 different net metering policies, and buildings ranging from 1 million square feet down to 100,000 square feet. So it's a little bit of a challenge prioritizing those. You know, our campuses net meter anywhere from 20 kilowatts up to 300. Some have a monthly true up, some have an annual true up. Some net meter energy and demand, others only credit us for the kilowatt hours of energy. So that makes it hard to you know, have a one size fits all plan for each of our buildings. You know, as a public institution, we're kind of obligated to be prudent with our taxpayer funds. So we have to go through a pretty complex strategic and economic analysis to assemble that PV roadmap. So, you know, just kind of put that in perspective, at our TrueX building, that massive system that I showed you the picture of, that only provides about 25% of the energy for that building. By comparison, the new system we commissioned at Fort Atkinson, although it's a much smaller system, it's 150 kW, it provides all of the electricity for that campus and will be a net zero electric facility. So that, you know, those are the kind of, you know, for any other school district, those are most likely the type of analyses that they will have to do, or for any municipal government, if you have multiple buildings in your portfolio, and if you have multiple electric service providers, it's a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
The one other thing I would note is that in addition to energy efficiency and solar, we are looking at all technologies. We also operate a Vestas V15 wind turbine. Several of our newer buildings have geothermal heating and cooling. And we've done some feasibility looking at energy storage as well. So it is really an all-in effort, both from all our buildings and also all technologies.
Yes, thank you, Ken. So your point about when you compare the solar system at the Fort Atkinson campus to the main building at TrueX really highlights the importance of parallel generation tariffs and net metering, and being able to offset more than just the electricity that is being used in real time. The importance of banking. Any response from Nick or Samantha here? All right, moving on then to Samantha. Both Wisconsin and Illinois, as you've shown in one of your slides, they have strong carbon reduction goals, and that RMI study, that 62% of the gas use in Illinois happens in buildings. These emissions will not decrease at the pace needed to address climate change without a renewable electrical grid paired with deployment of heat pumps. Assuming the situation in our state is similar, what is required among states, in your mind, that have the aggressive carbon reduction goals to build a policy climate that supports building electrification and other beneficial uses of electricity? Mm-hmm.
Thanks for the question, Mike. So there is no pathway to addressing climate change without addressing fossil use in buildings. And as I had mentioned earlier, you know, we have a larger challenge here in the Midwest because of our cold climate and the way we've built out our system to be pretty reliant on gas for our heating and cooking, et cetera. And so the problem is reliance on fossil fuels in buildings, and the solution is largely recognized as electrification, as you mentioned, Mike, moving to heat pumps. We do recommend that's where people start. I'm not going to get too much into the technology. I know that there's a panel with Robin Lazowski from Slipstream, where she's going to be talking about a whole range of new cool technologies. So I'll leave that to her to really talk about the pros and cons, but I will talk about the policies. So I had raised that slide earlier that had a few key categories of policies that we tend to recommend. So the first one is on new construction, really trying to make sure that this next generation of homes and buildings is as efficient as possible and is either ready for electrification or is all electric anyway. So the first piece here is codes on new construction. So adopting the newest version of the International Energy Conservation Code, the IECC, the 2021 code was approved last fall. And as I understand it, I was looking at the governor's task force on climate change report last night. One of the recommendations is to go ahead and adopt that code for commercial and residential buildings. And it does sound like your code in Wisconsin is several years behind, which leaves a ton of cost-effective savings opportunities on the table for buildings. And then the 2021 IEC is just a little bit more detail on that. It is the most energy efficient code ever. There was some really cool language that was in it initially that got stripped out, unfortunately, before it was finalized. that would have provided all electric ready requirements for new buildings. But the silver lining is that there is an appendix provided with that code that states can adopt voluntarily. So if Wisconsin does go ahead and go to the next version of the code, the 2021, you could take a look at that electric ready or all electric provisions for commercial and residential. So I think that's a really great opportunity that we should be talking about. We're talking about it in Illinois as well, in other states, and in Michigan. The other piece here is what local municipalities can do. So stretch codes or reach codes. So these are codes at the local level that can reach beyond the version of the code that's been adopted at the state level. Historically, stretch codes have focused on energy efficiency, but more and more there's a growing movement to push for decarbonization and electrification focused stretch codes. So again, my understanding is that Wisconsin is not a home rule state anymore. You would need a statutory change to allow your local communities to go ahead and do these stretch codes. But I did see that the governor's task force report did recommend this. And then from a cost effectiveness perspective, when we're talking about new buildings, it is cost effective right now to go to all electric because you're avoiding all those hookups. And you can do it all together and just completely avoid the gas hookup in general. There's another RMI report that came out last year that uses Minneapolis as the cold climate region proxy. And they do conclude that for new construction, all electric is cost effective today. So the other piece to be aware of is existing buildings, which obviously is a much more challenging part of the equation. We just need to get as many retrofits as possible, as many demonstration projects out there into the community, into people's homes. We need to build that awareness, and we need to demonstrate that this technology can work in a cold climate and that it does reduce bills, it improves people's comfort in their homes, it improves health outcomes, and in particular, building awareness amongst builders, installers, implementers who are in there recommending, a new furnace when your gas furnace just died is really a key part of this. And then the other part is that I would recommend focusing on low income and multifamily housing as much as we can, because there's a concern that, we'll be leaving folks behind on an increasingly expensive system if we don't do that. Another piece here for existing buildings is building energy performance standards. I know there's a lot here. I'm going to try to get through it pretty quickly, but BEPSs for existing buildings are actually quite effective at making sure that those buildings are more efficient and pushing towards all electric. There's one in St. Louis that was passed last year that is applying to buildings over 50,000 square feet, and it sets a minimum performance standard for buildings. Energy efficiency programs as well. Another really key place to get some of this technology out into the marketplace. Pairing electrification, retrofits, so trying to get heat pumps out through efficiency programs, pairing that with building envelope measures. I mean, it's really important to have a super efficient home so that your cold climate heat pump works well. And then the last bucket of policies I'll mention is removing regulatory barriers. And that also applies to the energy efficiency programs. Look at your state energy efficiency standard in Wisconsin. Can you leverage it to get the market moving on heat pumps? Are there fuel switching barriers to doing that? In Illinois, for example, we let some of the gas savings that, that the electric company can get from doing some switching in buildings, we let them count that towards their kilowatt hour requirement for the statutory requirement in the state. So that's one thing to look at. And then last is rate design in terms of regulatory barriers, really getting customer rates right. That's going to be key to realizing customer savings and grid benefits. Time of use rates, real-time pricing is all about taking those electric appliances and making sure that they are being preheated or used at times of the day when the power is the cheapest or when renewables are most online. That's going to be another part of this huge ecosystem of grid flexibility as we try to integrate more renewables. So Mike, I think I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to go back to Nick for a second and Ken, because both Nick and Ken are members of the Wisconsin Distributed Resources Collaborative. The commission, Public Service Commissions, initiated a proceeding to update PSC 119, which is the interconnection rule. Now, you quoted some statistics indicating healthy growth on the residential side of solar systems. And what makes that more remarkable is that we're laboring under a very antiquated interconnection rule that was adopted in 2004. So my questions to you are, what changes would you like to see in an up-to-date interconnection rule? And then as a follow-up, given the likelihood that a new rule will not take effect for 2 years or a little longer than that, are we stuck with the current outdated standards and procedures, or are there workarounds we can try to adopt in the interim, especially regarding storage technologies?
Yeah, so I'll stay away from the workaround. I'm sure there's too many lawyers online to talk about some of that stuff. But no, in all seriousness, I'm really excited about this. I think this is going to be a huge thing for the state. I think Abby talked about it in the keynote, this morning about, some of those things that really need to change as far as interconnection rules. And even in a state like in Iowa, where, we did our rules in 2011, we revisited them in 17 and 18. Understanding that we have that framework there, but it has to keep evolving. It has to keep changing. I will say that PSC 119 was way ahead of its time when other states didn't even have, what is DG, right? And what is an interconnection process? There at least was one there. So no, I agree with kind of those things that she had outlined this morning, and the process and transparency on having some teeth to some of these rules, if you will. The interconnection agreement, if you have a 10 megawatt project, you have a 4-page interconnection agreement, which to me, it sounds great for, if someone had to read through that, but, to be able to provide all the information, both for the utility and the customer, to really understand how am I supposed to be operating this thing? What am I allowed and not allowed to do from a technical and a electrical standpoint? It's just not enough. So, I'm really excited to work on it. I think, Ken, I've been talking about it in White Earth since I started in there. And I just think, when you look at models like the SGIP, when you look at the IREC model, there's just a lot of opportunity there. There's a lot of opportunity for change. There's a lot of opportunity for the transparency that's kind of needed in these projects. As far as integrating other technologies, things like storage, I think somewhat of a workaround is really, you have to evaluate how these things are being used, right? Because it really matters, if you're doing solar plus battery or just battery alone or whatever it might be, if it's AC coupled versus DC coupled, if it's going to use for backup generation versus, peak shaving, or just from an economic standpoint, all of those things matter as far as how you review a project. To be kind of handcuffed into, hey, we only have 10 business days to review this new use case isn't going to really work. So that engineering review process really needs to be transparent, but also needs to allow that flexibility to take into account how these things are being utilized, not just the size that's going in behind the meter.
Okay. Ken?
Yeah, I'd add just a little bit to that. I think you asked what would we like to see in the new interconnection rulemaking process. I think energy storage would be a good start because it doesn't currently appear there. I will say, Madison College, we've looked at energy storage a little bit and done some feasibility analyses. Right now for us, for the money available to spend, our best investment is just to pursue more solar projects. But that's changing really fast. If you've looked at what's happened in battery prices just in the last 2 years, your keynote speaker on the first day of the Renew Summit addressed this. They are dropping incredibly fast. And we see that changing in the next year or two, where the tipping point is going to be there for the college. We're already installing some residential size systems so that our students can get used to the technology and start learning about that. And we know the day will come soon where it's going to make sense to look at a large scale project at one of our campuses. Where that's really going to matter is if we have a campus that has a very spiky demand profile, where we're operating a lot of arc welders or something like that, for example, and we can take some of those hits with the battery. I mentioned some of our campuses serve as emergency response shelters. There's value to having a battery there from a resilience standpoint, especially if we can eliminate a backup generator. And then for our campuses where we're maybe constrained by our net metering policies, if we can add storage, that allows us to install more solar, generate more energy, and then, you know, do more self-consumption of the renewable energy that we produce. So it'll be interesting to see how those interconnection rules get revised over the next couple of years, and also see how the market evolves as that happens.
Yeah, and just to add final thought here on that is, you know, it'll be in place in a couple of years, right when, you know, the industry's trying to, you know, change as well, and you have these FERC orders that are coming out, and we'll be implementing these changes. So that flexibility will be key. So not only having, you know, you could copy all day long from another state and another rule book, but you need that flexibility going forward. Otherwise, we're right back where we were. So.
Michael, you're muted again.
Sorry about that. We are coming up on 10 minutes before the hour, and I want to make sure that we get at least one question in from the audience. And been a number of questions along this theme, but we're going to give Samantha first crack at it. Be aware, I'm going to try to limit your responses, each of you, to 2.5, 3 minutes tops. So the question is, does the Natural Resources Defense Council support bans on gas extensions for new construction? And should these bans be phased in or immediate?
So we have certainly supported gas bans in California. Now, I think it's pretty infamous now what happened in Berkeley about a year or two ago was one of the first bans on gas and new construction, and it just sort of marched down the peninsula and kept going to other communities. We definitely have supported them, but I think for the Midwest, I'm not sure it's the right frame. Because what's happened in the wake of all these gas bans being passed, while very effective, is that the gas industry has used it as a bit of a cudgel, and painting a picture of deprivation that that decarbonization, moving on climate change and moving towards clean energy is about depriving you of options and taking away reliable sources of energy like gas. And I think that's just not the right way to think about this. And so I would say for the Midwest, we should be thinking about other ways to structure these kinds of policies. So if in Wisconsin, you get the opportunity to do stretch codes or reach codes at the local level, you know, certainly look at all electric requirements, electric ready, but I would suggest phasing them in. We do need to get this technology to be more accepted, I think, amongst homeowners, amongst builders, et cetera. We need to prove that it works. We're in a very cold climate here. We need people to not be left out in the cold. And so I think the gas ban is just the wrong way to go. Another way to go is just to put a full CO2 emission reduction requirement on it, and then let all these technologies compete. I mean, if a gas heat pump wants to try to compete with an electric heat pump from a carbon perspective, we can certainly let it try. So that's where we're at, even though I think ultimately we do want to move away from the gas system 100% by 2050.
Thank you. Nick or Ken, any thoughts about that or alternatives to gas bans?
I'll just say in general, I think there needs to be multiple strategies and not just one blinder path forward in a lot of this, you know. So yeah, I'll leave it at that, but multiple strategies is certainly beneficial.
Another question that came in, more effective education on climate and energy science is sorely needed at every level. This is mostly a Ken question. The question is, are we making any progress? Are you seeing changes?
Well, I can say I've been at Madison College for almost 20 years now, and during that time, the enrollment in our renewable energy program has more than doubled. So that's definitely encouraging. But what's even more significant than that is, you know, beyond just the students in our renewable energy program, we have students now in all kinds of other traditional fields that are being exposed to clean energy and climate science. Everything from students in our construction programs to our electrical trades to our architecture programs, sustainability is really being integrated across the curriculum into those fields. So while they may not be, a climate science major or an environmental science major, those principles of sustainability have been, I think, really integrated in the K-12 system, and the students that come to us at the technical college expect that to be part of their educational program now. So yeah, I've definitely observed a change in that area.
Very good. Last question. This is an Alliant question. Current rate of renewable energy growth is not even close to what is needed to meet greenhouse gas reduction targets. So what are Alliant's renewable targets for 2030 and 2050? Corollary, can we get to 50% by 2030?
Whew. Well, I mean, we have the clean energy blueprint, right? And I think we are endeavoring to be carbon neutral or carbon zero by 2050. I think if you looked at announcements that were made a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they're very different than recent ones. When you did not have announcement of coal plants converting or shutting down, now you're having them kind of left and right, and not just from Alliant perspective, but from utility perspectives across the board, because it's no longer cost effective to have those resources. So I think the answer is yes and maybe. It's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot. It's going to take some flexibility, and there might be some technology that is on the cusp today that is fringe, but will be center in the future, that I think will help us get there. I think Samantha's talked a little bit about the differences in, let's say, California and the Midwest as far as a heating perspective on natural gas, and natural gas is huge, right? As far as heating and appliances, other appliances, and water heating and cooking in the Midwest. So how do we transition that? How do we transition that home usage to those other technologies and things? And it's going to take all of us. And I think this is perfect for an all-in perspective. It's not going to be just Alliant doing this alone in a vacuum, right? It's going to take all of us to do that. And to go back on that education piece again, that's everyone in this conference, going back into their communities and to their neighborhoods and talking about these things. I wouldn't leave it just up to Ken, teaching the youngsters, if you will, all about this, and leave it up to them. I think it's on all of us to make sure that this gets spread out. And if we're going to educate the populace, it has to start with the catalysts like these types of groups.
Thank you, Nick. That was a particularly apt closing set of remarks. Thank you for that. As we segue out of our discussion of all in, but thank you for pointing out that really it does come down to all of us, and not simply going to conferences and talking amongst ourselves at these summits, but also taking what we talk about, what we learn outside. So thank you very much. And I want to thank all of our panelists, Nick Smith, Ken Walls, and Samantha Williams, for an insightful, illuminating, dare I say it, meaty conversation. Hopefully our audience will agree with that. I also want to thank Arch Electric again for sponsoring this session. And to the audience out there, thank you so much for joining us. Let us know if you have questions or would like to follow up on what you heard today. I also want to encourage our audience and panel members to join today's industry conversation session from 2 to 3 p.m. this afternoon to continue these renewable energy discussions. All you need to do is check the online agenda to join in. Finally, many of our sponsors are represented in the virtual exhibitor space. Please visit the event website and click on exhibitors to learn more about and connect with our 2021 sponsors. It may not be quite as same as physically going to a booth and shaking hands and walking away with a couple of pens, but I think you'll find it works out pretty well under the circumstances. Many have virtual video meeting space hours scheduled where you can pop in for an immediate conversation with the organizations working to advance renewable energy in Wisconsin. And from all of us at Renew, hope you've enjoyed the summit thus far and hope you enjoy the rest of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for
Thanks,
moderating,
folks.
Michael. It was a pleasure.
It was very much a pleasure with you guys. That was a really good session. Thank you.